going to do okay, now we're being recorded. Awesome. Part 2 of our winter training series. This one might have a little less information than some of the others, but it's a kind of a key building block. We're going to talk about a couple things today to further our discussion about change orders, but we're going to really focus in on field change payments. So let's just take a look back to last week. It's already a week ago where we had session number 1, and we did an introduction. We talked about the 100 section, and we highlighted different areas of the 100 section that kind of guide us and to give us, number 1, the authority to issue change orders. Then we talked about different types of change orders, just a little bit of an overview. We talked about the difference between a contract change order and what Site Manager calls change orders, little nuances there. Then we also reviewed how you can identify changes that are coming up, whether they've already happened, like item overruns, or whether it's new work, and we kind of know basically the scope of what's going to go on. We also hit on the AEW form, or the CONR 104, and there's just an example of the CONR 104 that we looked at last week. We talked about how to fill this out. We showed you all the different areas where what needs to be filled out and how you'd handle a couple of those boxes that may be a little difficult sometimes. And just remember, when you get to the end, the dollar amount's going to trigger the approval level. But we want to remember that regional policy is going to dictate on this form. So for instance, in my region, we don't use the under 20,000 EIC approval. We still make the construction supervisor approve even an under $20,000 AEW. It's just a regional policy. And then I was also, someone informed me that another region, they don't run everything through their change order person in the region. The AEWs, they run them through the construction supervisor. So again, regional policy. I might have misstated that, but just, see what your regional policy is for how you actually route these and get them back from the field. And just a reminder, prior to starting work, we need an AEW for any new or added work and all added quantities to existing items. And just as a way of a reminder, this is like a standalone form. It's not tied to Site Manager. This doesn't really affect your change order going forward, except for if you haven't really received authorization for some things you might be asking for in the future, you might have to put another one in. But this is just kind of standalone form off to the side. And we just remind everybody the big value in the field is that you have someone approving the change. So you're not out there, quote unquote, on an island approving extra work or something. You have, especially big value of extra work. You have someone else kind of concurring and giving you approval. So it's really a protection for those of you in the field, whether you're office engineers or EICs, to have an AEW, ready to go. And there was a question last week we talked about, just keep them simple. These are not like change orders. You don't need to be, overly descriptive, just enough information to give an idea what the scope is. And really the items and the quantities are going to help you really dial that in. So this should be something you could do relatively quickly and not really distract you from, other big parts of your job. So we want to talk about field change payments today. Well, what is a field change payment? Let's define it first. Really, the references we have, it's an item, contract pay item. So the standard specifications 697 is for field change payment. Discusses field change payment, and also the CAM 104-02. So how do we define a field change payment? Well, it's a contract pay item. So you'll see it listed in your CONR 22. You'll see it listed in the back of your proposal as an item in the contract. It provides a contract contingency allowance for the timely payment for extra work to fulfill the intent of the contract documents. Work must be authorized under an authorization of extra work, the CONR 104, and completed prior to submittal of an FCP or field change payment for payment. A FCP is not a contract change order. So if we kind of break this down a little bit, there's about approximately 6% of the value of the contract is set aside in the field change payment. And this really, the intent is to be able to pay for small overruns in quantity and things like that. So it's already there, and it's not changing the contract because the money is already set aside. But with that, there are some, different rules and things that we have to follow when we use this process to address items that overrun or new items of work in the contract. So why use a field change payment? Why are we spending a whole session here talking about the field change payment? Well, number one, the speed of approval is very quick. So I know in our region, and we're a smaller region, so I can't speak for every region, but it's not unusual to get a field change payment approved in less than a week, start to finish. It only goes to the regional construction engineer level. It doesn't leave the region. So if you're really desperate to get this, done, you can pick up the phone and call a couple people in your office and probably get this pushed through pretty quickly. So we want to remember that it's a very speedy approval. The second reason is the money's already associated with the project. You might liken it to opening your wallet or your purse or whatever you carry your money and your credit cards in, and using cash first and then using the credit card. Like the credit card's not your money, but the cash, that's right there. So this is already in the contract. It's not extra. You're not needing to, offset it with something else or explain why you're increasing the value of the contract. It's already in there. So that's another really good reason to use the field change payment. So we can pay the contractor quick, and it's already there. So when can you use an FCP? We mentioned that there's some rules associated with the FCP item. And again, these are taken from the standard specification 697. So the intent of the FCP, again, is to be able to make payments for simple routine items quickly, the mechanism to pay quickly. We should always use it first when we can. So the first thing we need to do is determine, is the work that I'm considering eligible? So we made it really simple here. Green is good, red is bad in this situation. To be eligible, it must be complete. So you must have already done the work, and it must be within the original scope. So and then we mentioned item overruns. So item overruns are like a main target for the FCP because it's work that's already been done. It's been flagged, it's been quantified, it's been reported, the materials have been received. So that's probably the largest lion's share of the FCP is used for item overruns. We can use it for new items if it's what we'll call a simple addition, and we're going to talk about that next week in segment number 3. And then we can also use it for price adjustments, fuel, asphalt, steel, depending on how much of a swing you have there. You may be able to use this item if you're on a smaller job or a job that's not really incurring very many adjustments and you wait to the end, you may have used this all up. So again, routine items and quickly, that's the main thing. So what's not eligible? Anything outside the original scope, anything that's a disputed work item. So we can't, have a settlement or contractor settlement that uses the FCP item. Forest accounts or forest account estimates, we're not allowed to use those mechanisms under a FCP. We can't introduce a value engineering proposal or any time-related provisions, including incentive, disincentive, liquidated damage, time dispute. We can't do any of those things within the FCP. Okay, so it's pretty clear, what we can use it for and what we can't. We need to just go back to the 100 section for a minute. We didn't really get into this last week because we talked a lot about the 100 section, a lot of different things. But in the 100 section, we did touch on significant changes, and this is where major item, minor item comes into play. So you may have heard these terms thrown around in the field office, and you may not be 100% familiar with what a major item and a minor item are. And this is the standard specification definition of a major item. So a contractor may throw around the term, oh, that's a major item, or someone else may say it's a major item of work or something like that. They may mean it in another context, but in the context of the contract administration, here's really the definition right out of the 100 section. A major item, any contract pay item for which the original unit bid price multiplied by the original item quantity exceeds the following minimum major item value based on total contract bid price. Okay, that's a lot of words there that I just read, but the chart makes it a little clearer. So if your contract is less than $1.3 million, that's your bid amount. So make sure you're looking at your bid amount. A major item threshold is $20,000. So if the total value of the item, the number of units multiplied by the unit price is 20,000 or more, you have a major item. Now, that's probably not a lot of our contracts. Probably the majority of our contracts land into the second category. So between 1.3 million and 66.5 million, it is 1.5% of the total contract bid price. Sounds a little confusing, but we're going to show you we can clear that up pretty quickly. And then, you know, don't see these jobs in Region 2, but greater than $66.5 million contract is $1 million or more is a major item value. And so it also, just as a note, it doesn't include the field change payment. So by defining the major item, we've also defined the minor item, because there's only two. An item can either be a major or a minor. So if it's not a major, it's a minor. Okay? Any questions on that? Does everyone kind of understand the difference between the major and the minor item there? Okay, good. So evaluating item overruns. So we can have an overrun on an item, but there's kind of two different conditions that you can end up having, and that's where the clause 104.04, significant changes in the character of the work. When we talk about changes in the character of work, portion A talks about, well, if something's just totally different than what was presented, but we really want to key in on B and C. So for major items, the significant change clause applies when the quantity is more than 125% or less than 75% of the original contract quantity. So what that's saying is if you have 100 of an item that's major, you can pay the bid price all the way up to 125 units. The minute you go over 125, we have to evaluate to see if a renegotiation of the item is warranted. And something else that gets us sometimes is this less than 75% of a major item. These ones kind of sneak up on us, so you got to really pay attention to your contract quantities when you're talking about major items, and when you start possibly adjusting things or looking at maybe, you know, workups that weren't done correctly in design. If you're going to underrun a major item, that also opens you up to a renegotiation. That is far more complicated than an overrun, because a lot of times by the time you realize you've underrun, it's too late. You've already done the work, and getting an agreed price can be difficult. Minor items also can have significant changes in the character of the work, but it's a different criteria. So for minor items, it has to be both more than 200% of the original contract quantity and result in an increase of more than $5,000 from the original contract amount. So a couple of examples, if we go back to that 100 unit example, let's say we have 100 units of something and we put 200 in. We haven't crossed that threshold. We can still pay the bid price per unit up to that 200%, double the item. If we underrun it, there is nothing provided in the specification to renegotiate that. So we can even zero a minor item and there's no renegotiation or analysis necessary. Now also, it has to increase the contract more than $5,000. This is relatively new if some of you have worked for the department for quite a while, might remember having to, negotiate $2,000 items or something like that. But just as an example, maybe think about if your job has 10 signposts in it and maybe the contractor bids $100 a signpost. Maybe we go ahead and we put in 20 extras, let's say. So we've now tripled the contract. We've gone up to 300%. But it's only a $2,000 increase because we had the first $1,000 for the first 10, and then we added another $2,000 with the 20 at $100 each. So we're less than the 5,000. Even though we're over the 200, we can continue the bid price in that situation. Great question, and we're going to get to that in the next slide. So we are talking about major items. So we were in that, most of our jobs are in that 1.5% of contract value. Seems like that's a little complicated. Do I have to run numbers on every item in my job? No. We have a major items report in business intelligence. Okay, so again, we urge all of you to get very familiar with business intelligence. Make sure you have a login. Look at the roadmap. When you do log in, it tells you where all these reports can be found. Lots of great reports in here, and then everyone has some they like and some they don't find a lot of value in, but probably half the reports here you're going to use very frequently. This is one right at the beginning. It's good to run. You go to change orders once you get into the field office report section, and then you get to the major items report, as you can see in the second or right-hand screenshot, and that will give you a lot of good information on your contract. So this is a Region 2 contract that was just recently let for over $1.3 million. You could see it wasn't too far over that. I think it was around a $2 million job. So for the major item criteria in the first circled box, it has to be an item with a value of greater than $27,453.41. So it's doing that math for you. It's telling you, here's the criteria. Anything above this number is a major item. And you could see it even tells you in the report that it's taken out the value of the FCP item to calculate that. So then if you look at the second box over to the right, you see a lot of pertinent data about the major items. So it tells you at what point you're at 75%. It tells you at what point you're at 125%, what that quantity range would be. And then it's also giving you the original contract amount and the dollar amount for that. So we would really encourage everybody at the beginning of a project to print this out. Keep it with your ConR 22. Your money sheets. You probably have money sheets in the field office when you start the job. If you don't want to duplicate paper, you could highlight things on your original money sheets. But you want to know what these items are, and you want to know when you're looking at breaking thresholds or when you're not. And also then if it's not on this list as a major item, then it's a minor item. So the minor item kind of falls in line pretty quickly. So that's how you tell a major and a minor item. And again, we are only concerned about this when you break those criteria as far as changing the price. So if you had 100 of some item, and let's say it's a major item, and you installed an extra 10, so you've installed 110, you still need to run some type of change order, either a field change payment or a regular change order to pay for those 10 units, but you don't have to renegotiate. So there's a difference between looking at it to renegotiate it and just addressing it with a change order to be able to actually pay for it with the contractor. And we're just going to introduce this flow chart. You'll find this in the CAM, slightly different version, not wholly different, just very slightly different. We're going to talk a lot more about this in the coming weeks, but we thought we'd introduce it here. And this is just a little flow chart to help guide your decision making when you do break a threshold. And it kind of walks you through all the things we just talked about. So right in the upper left is where you start. Is it a new item? So if yes, it's a new item, you see you follow that green line down and you're starting at the place of, renegotiating or negotiating the item price. If it's not, then you go over, okay, is it a minor item? So we defined what that is. Then you go down to yes, and you see that box, just the things we're talking about. Is it over 200%, and is it over $5,000? And if it's no, it tells you, use the bid price. If it's yes, then you go down to reviewing that price. If it's not a minor item, you see, okay, we go over, is it greater than 125%? If the answer is no, then you go down to use bid price. And if it's yes, you go down to looking at what we're going to talk about in that in next week in that training about added work and negotiating using non-force account methods. And you could see if you get confused on the major, minor, you need to know if it's a major or minor, but if you haven't broken a threshold, it's going to tell you go ahead and use that bid price. So you don't need to remember all of this. Some of it is baked into this flow chart. And then we're going to go down and look at different ways that we can come up with agreed price methods for either new work or work that has broken a major or minor item threshold. And the big takeaway from this chart is starting at the top and working down is your easiest solutions first. That's pretty much what it is. And it's getting to a point where a change order is not a huge, necessarily some huge paper, lots of analysis and all these things. It can be very simple. So basically, the takeaway from here is when an item breaks a threshold, an analysis or a renegotiation is needed. So you can see even some of these, and we talked about next week. Sometimes we are able to use the bid price because it compares favorably to some other things. We can just extend that. Okay, moving on.
We do have a couple of questions there, Mike.
Okay, go ahead, Eli. Is it a good spot for those?
Yeah, sure, why not? The first was where do we find the flow chart? And that is in this presentation. It will be in the slides, and also it can be found in the CAM manual. Let's see here. What if an item exceeds 125% and then next estimate I paid the contractor more of this item? It will be on the new price or the original price. So I think what you're trying to say is you ran an estimate, you're at 125%. You would need to do some sort of a change order, whether it's a field change payment or a conventional change order to get it to the 125%, and then everything beyond that would then be at the new price unless the contractor agreed to the bid price. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's good. And that's really what we're trying to introduce to you today before we do the FCP. The FCP is like a slam dunk when you haven't broke a threshold, but you've gone over quantity on an item. And it happens, I don't know, Eli, how often is that? I mean, it happens like every estimate, right? We have a minor item or a major item that just squeaks over our contract amount, and, it might be by itself a small amount of money, but maybe added together, it could be thousands of dollars with other items doing the same thing. So we're really encouraging everyone to look at your minor overruns that don't break thresholds because you can clean them up quickly. You could do it with an FCP.
What else? I think we got one last question. The last paragraph in basis payment for the FCP item says that prior to processing the final payment, all FCP payments must be processed through an OOC. However, last week it stated that this was not necessary.
So basically what do we do at the end? Yeah, what do we do at the end, Eli, when we've used the FCP up but we're finaling a job?
Yeah, okay, so you're working on your cleanup order. You still have a balance of unused FCP money. You have to do, in your cleanup order, you would negate the remaining balance to bring that to zero.
Yeah, I think that kind of sums it up.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good. Is that it? Any more that we're missing?
I think we're good, unless anybody's got one they want to get in.
Okay, good. So there's some rules for the FCP. So we'll go into the FCP, but remember again, one of the biggest takeaways from the FCP is use this liberally before we necessarily break thresholds. We don't have to wait till it turns into a big thing. We can even run the FCP to add quantity, even if we know 2 months later we're going to add more to it. We can use the FCP to get it up to that 125 or whatever, or the 200, whatever we need to do. So that's the big takeaway is, really key in on those ones because it doesn't require anything from the contractor, it doesn't require any analysis. They're relatively straightforward and simple. So there's some rules that go along with the FCP. So number one, payments cannot cross categories. So if you have a multiple category job, which many of our jobs do, we have multiple categories, you can't, let's say, pay for overruns in category 1 with FCP money from category 2. So you have to stay within your category for your FCP usage, okay? And that kind of makes sense, right? That's a money thing or a tracking thing, and so we can't, once we've exhausted it, we're done. We cannot increase the FCP item or introduce it into a contract or category where it does not exist at award. So highly unlikely, but if for some reason a share does not have an FCP item, then we can't add it. And if we expend it all, we cannot get more. And it doesn't matter why we want more, we don't get more, okay? Some more rules. Rules for breaking thresholds shall apply. We kind of talked about that. So if we go over a major 125, we've got to justify the price. A minor, if we go more than 200 and 5,000, we must justify the price. Talk more about that next week. An AEW must be approved and attached in Site Manager. The AEW must be an exact match with the field change payment, with the FCP. It has to match item for item, quantity for quantity, dollar for dollar. That's one of the rules because then you're like having this pre-approval and it matches the FCP. So that's one of the special rules that apply to the FCP. Whereas, we may have written an AEW for some force account work and we put a very generic amount on it, maybe on the high end, not to exceed. And, we just use that proving that we were approved to do it. But the AEW is very specific. It has to match exactly. So to be honest with you, sometimes we write the AEW, as we've generated those overruns. And it's kind of, we're working concurrent with getting the FCP approved. So it'll get attached in Site Manager, and then it has to match exactly with what we put into Site Manager. An FCP order must be $0. We cannot add any money through the FCP. So we'll show you a little bit how to do that, but basically you're going to have a negative in your FCP item that balances all your positives in your other items. And then we've already talked about this, but the FCP order only goes to the regional construction engineer level. So it stays within your region. Again, that's why it's approved so quickly. It doesn't go to main office. It doesn't go to the comptroller. It stays right in your region, okay? So here's the process. There's really 6 steps to the process. The first one is we've already kind of gone through how you identify, but you're going to identify an overrun, a new item, or a price adjustment. So we showed you how to get at the status AB report, or you may just know that there's extra work that you've done, but usually in this case, the work already has to be done. So it's either a new item that you're identifying or it's an existing item overrun. Second step is determine if it's within the contract thresholds or if it's a new item. So if we look at that flow chart, we look at what we know about major and minor items. Hey, we didn't break a threshold. Perfect, we can move forward. Oh, we did break a threshold, or it is a new item. We're going to talk about that next week of how we physically address that. Third thing, if needed. So if we haven't broke a threshold, we don't need an agreement from the contractor. But if it's a new item or if we've broken those contract thresholds, we're going to have to obtain pricing agreement from the contractor. And if it's not a simple price agreement, we may not be able to use a field change payment. But many times we can do that in a simple manner. The fourth is submit the AEW. Oh, go ahead,
Ethan. Questions, Mike.
Okay.
I've been answering them in the chat. Let me see here. Let's scroll back up here. Oh, what does FCP stand for? Field change payment. I've got a couple of questions asking, once you exhaust the field change payment item, is it replenishable? And the answer is no. Once it's exhausted, that's it. Your field change payments are over and done with, and you will be doing conventional change orders from then out. What else do we got? We got a couple of longer questions, so you'll just have to bear with me. Multiple categories. When it comes to quantities regarding going over, especially major items, it has to be treated. Oh, yeah. Simply put, you cannot cross categories with the field change payments items, meaning you can't increase the quantity in category number 1 using the field change payment item in category number 2 or vice versa. The thresholds are applicable based on the original bid quantity. Quantity thresholds are not dependent upon the category. It's the original bid quantity, and then how you spread it amongst the categories afterwards is up to however it played out. What else do we got here? On an AEW overrun, the work is done. You need to separate AEWs for one portion of overrun done, then a separate AEW for remainder. No, that can all, you break a threshold, that can all be done on one AEW. If it meets, you know, the criteria. If you're, you know, depending on your scenario, if you have a field change payment money, maybe you don't, maybe you break it up into 2 orders, but it is possible to do it in one order, you know, bump it up to the 125, 200%, 5K rule, and then you renegotiate. That can, the adding of that new item can all be done on the same order if it's a conventional order. The new item rules.
I'll jump in there too. You know, sometimes you're going to end up with a couple AEWs to get an FCP out. Like, I'll give you an example. We had a pretty good overrun this summer on a contract where we had to put in extra footing concrete because the rock wasn't where everybody thought the rock was. So right off the bat, we knew we had a big overrun. So the EIC submitted an AEW just to cover the overrun and what we projected it would be before we even did the work. So we had an AEW in hand to you know, take care of this. But when we got down to it, it was like, well, we can take care of most of that overrun in an FCP. So he submitted another AEW just specific to the FCP, but we weren't able to pay for all of that overrun in the FCP. So we just kind of tapped out the FCP with another AEW. So he filled out an extra AEW so he could use the FCP. But then when he's running the final order, change order later on to address the part we weren't able to pay for in the FCP, he could use that initial AEW that had the whole quantity in it. So there can be times where, for the sake of clarity, you're just going to do another AEW when you get to an FCP. Does that make sense, Eli?
Yeah, well said. That's what I was trying to get out, but it wouldn't come out that way.
Yeah, sometimes it's not worth trying to piece together a bunch of AEWs you already have. It's like just fill out another one quick, make it match the FCP. Then it's just a slam dunk. Nobody questions it, and away you go.
Right. Couple other questions. We've always been told that we can use the same AEW for multiple FCPs. That is true. AEWs are not like change order specific. You can break that up however you want. Personally, I don't do that. And that's my own decision. I like to serialize my AEWs, but if you don't, so be it. I find it's easier for me that way, and everybody, works a little differently. So if that works for you, so be it.
Yeah, we do at OE class really, honestly, try to teach everybody to have an AEW that matches the FCP just for, consistency's sake. I don't know if we find it somewhere, but it's a little bit of a good practice. Now, if you're on some other system, that's fine, but it makes it easier if somebody else has to pick up your work or move on. You move on, somebody else picks up the work, or EIC ends up cleaning something up. Because the AEWs aren't really in a system somewhere, they're kind of floating in space. Not that you probably can't find them, but sometimes it's easier just to set one up that matches. And again, they're pretty simple, everybody, AEW. So if you haven't done them, they're pretty simple. They get turned around really quickly for the most part, especially these just minor overruns, things like that. Okay, what else we got, Eli?
Mike and Eli, I'd like to interject for a second.
Sure, go ahead.
Folks, we have a feature in this training program through WebEx that indicates whether people are multitasking on their computers. And we were trying not to use it, but I just received a flag that only 60% of our audience is fully paying attention. So for the other 40, every time you open an email, another program on your computer, we get a red flag. So just wanted to let you know that. Continue, guys.
Let's see. Perfect. Yeah, we have a few other questions, Mike. Significant change. Is renegotiation mandatory when thresholds are exceeded? Yes, but it is, you do have the ability to retain the bid price if the contractor chooses to accept that.
Yeah, and we're going to really go over that next week. Specifically, when you exceed a threshold, what do you do? But there's many times when the bid price is still acceptable and you can continue with it, but you need to justify it.
Mm-hmm. What else? If we have an AEW for 100 additional, but we currently completed the work for 50, we can do an FCP for 50 now and then another one for 50 later. And yeah, that is correct. The rules with the FCP item state the work has to be completed. What else do we got? You can create a new sequence item in another category. That looks like more of a comment as opposed to a question. Can we use FCP and underrun items at the same time? No. If it's an underrun, and you're negating an item, decreasing a quantity from a contract, that cannot be put in an FCP. FCP is item increases, new items, along with the FCP item.
Yeah, you can in a change order. In a regular change order, you can introduce underruns to try to balance things out, and that's a good policy, but that's a change order, not in an FCP.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. Looks like Amy answered that one. Yes, an AEW has to be attached to a field change payment. And what is the current AEW? The one I have is from 2018. Like we touched on last week, it is in the fillable forms, and I do believe the latest and greatest version of that is from 2018.
Yeah, if you have the one that self-totals and also has the boxes at the bottom for under 20, 20 to 50, over 50, then you've got the new one. I just don't have the total. I don't have that date either. Okay, so we can submit an AEW matching the proposed FCP if needed. If we've already got it, then we don't need to do that step. Submit the FCP order following QRG number 19. So we're going to show you where the QRGs are in a second if you don't know where they are, but there's a QRG telling you exactly how to do the site manager side. And then the last thing is make the contract payment. So once the FCP is approved, the items automatically are approved for payment in your next estimate. And we've got a screenshot that's in the office engineer manual that kind of shows what this looks like. So the image above at the top is the CONR 7, which is the kind of cover sheet for a change order. So this is you can see at the top it says it's a field change payment. And I've just highlighted two things. The box in red on the top is the smooth corrugated polyethylene pipe. And you can see that we have a change order item quantity there for 48 as an overrun. And you can see some other items in there as well. And then you can see the field change payment line item has a decrease in it. And when you go to the bottom, the change order total is $0, 0.000. Now, I think you might, Eli, correct me if I'm wrong, you may get a rounding error here once in a while, right? Of like a thousandth of a cent or something.
Yeah, it's possible.
It's not always zeros. It could be 001 or something, which are like little rounding things. But basically, this should be 0. You shouldn't have actual dollars in here or anything more than a couple little numbers at the end, maybe. If you have any actual cents in there, it's probably there's an error. You've done some math incorrectly. And then at the bottom, it shows you what it looks like when the CONR 22. This is going back to the CONR 22 after you've processed the FCP, and it just, once the FCP is approved, it just automatically associates what was in your change order to those items. The next estimate you process will pay those items at those quantities that were approved in the FCP. Okay? So it's just a graphical, we go through all the steps, but it shows you exactly what we're looking at. So at this point, we're going to give it over to Eli. I'm going to, let's see, I'm going to get out of here. And Amy, I think Eli will have to be the presenter, right? There we go.
While we're waiting for Eli to set up, I just want to answer a question that I received privately. Unfortunately, for those of you on the call who are working on design-build projects, we will not be differentiating between design-build and regular design-build when it comes to force accounts in the design-build and FCP. If you have individual questions about design-build projects, you should reach out to your regional change order specialist.
Can you guys see my screen all right? Hello?
Yes, we can see it. Sorry. I was scrambling to get my unmute button.
All right. So now at this point, we are going to attempt to do a live field change payment. I cannot make any guarantees this will work. I'm working remotely off a hotspot, but we're going to do our best to hopefully power through this. So we have Site Manager open. The first thing I wanted to show you was the quick reference guides. They can be found through Site Manager. Hopefully this works. And for this exercise, we're going to be using QRG number 19. All right. So in this scenario, we have, this is an AB flag that we spoke about last week for D263073, which currently has 2 status A's, 20302 and 30415 for 40 cubic yards each. We saw this, the last estimate we processed. We put in an AEW for this, and we're going to address it using the field change payment item. We encountered during recon a wet area, and we needed an undercut for 50 feet. The items are listed below, field change payment item, and we're going to get this in the Site Manager. The first step is using the change orders icon, the change order maintenance icon, and then the change order icon. All right, so this is the header for a change order. A lot of you have probably done DWRs in the past, and this kind of looks a little similar. Upon your initial entry, it will be blank. We haven't told it any information. Similar to the DWR, we have to tell it what job we want to be in. And it is also worth noting that I am currently in as the Assistant PM, as you can see in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. So we're going to go up here to the Services button and choose Keys. We are going to scroll down to D263073. All right. Now, once again, this is the training module. Appearance-wise, it's very similar to the production version of Site Manager. However, you will notice some, variations. Up above, you can see this is change order number 210, which for training purposes, we really don't care. We want to learn how to put in a field change payment. So first of all, we're going to give this a description, and this is going to be change order number 1, FCP number 1. All right. And the reason code, from the drop down, you can see we have multiple selections. Please be as accurate as possible when selecting the reason code. Main office filters change orders based on the reason code you select. In this instance, we are going to use added work, and our change order type is going to be a field change payment.
27 times 3.
Since we had some minor item overruns, we're only going to be selecting the overrun underrun function. That allows us to access all the existing items in the contract under the items tab, which we'll get to in a second. However, if we did have a new item, if we clicked the extra work box as well, it would allow us to add new items to the job. In this scenario, it's not needed, so we will not be selecting that feature. We are going to save. And just like the DWRs, we're working left to right. We're going to click on the Items tab. All right. We're going to come up here to Services again, and we are going to select an item. Our first item was line item number 8, 20302, unclassified excavation. We're going to select it. If you do note, this is a major item. You know, before we put our AEW in, we checked both of these items to make sure they were all within allowable thresholds, and in this case, they are. All right. So we are going to copy the item description to the change order item description, and increase was 40 from our AEW, resulting in an increase of $916, and we are going to save. All right. We have another item, so we are going to come up here to Services, select Item. And this time we are looking for 30415, line item 44. This one is also a major item. And we are going to copy the item description, paste it to the change order item description, and this is also an increase of 40. All right. And save. So we've increased both of these items 40 cubic yards. All right. Now we have to snag our field change payment item to balance this order out. Where is it? Right here. Same routine again. Copy the item description, paste it in the change order item description. And we know this from our AEW. It is minus 4,068. And it is critical that this number is a negative. You are drawing off of the money in the field change payment item. And save. All right. I'm going to go back to the header for a second. If you look here, this is blank, the approval level. Once we come up here to Services, calculate change order, it set the approval level. Because the change order amount works out to a 0 perfectly, this stays within the region, and that's exactly what we want. Sometimes it's possible due to rounding that you may end up with a balance here, and this would say, you know, main office. I've only ever seen that happen a handful of times, but it is possible. In that scenario, you would have to override the approval rules, and that's as far as we're really going to touch on that. If you do run into that exact scenario, I would contact your RCO, and they'll be able to talk you through correcting that. So all that's left to do now is come over to our explanations, and we can attach an explanation to an item in 3 different fashions. Personally, I like the specific item explanation. If we move our focus to this middle pane here, and we're going to do a new, it gives us a sequence number, and we are now able to attach an explanation to an item. Within Site Manager, if you right-click in here and filter search, there are standard explanations already built into Site Manager. With that, I'm going to give you a big warning. Some people really like these. Some people don't. It's kind of 50-50. And in my opinion, it's dependent upon the dollar value. If you're doing a very large increase, you know, say above $5,000 and greater, I would expect to see something more as a change order reviewer than a generic standard explanation. For the sake of training purposes, I'm going to use one. You guys don't want to sit there and watch me type. So we know that these are both major items. We are going to use the major item under 125%. Oh, that's not the right one. There we go. We're going to use the major item under 125%. We are going to, by double-clicking on each item over here on the right, we can add it to it. And you will see a check mark appear. It is now attached to that item. We're going to add it to this one as well. And save. For the FCP item, I'd most likely add another one by using the new button and state that, oh, I can't type. Something along that nature, and we will add it to the field change payment item. And we're basically complete with our data entry. We're using the field change payment item to address 2 major item overruns. And all that's left to do is switch it to, obviously you want to do a careful review prior to submitting, and then we're gonna submit this. We're gonna save. We're gonna switch it to pending in the status. Save again. All right, and for a field change payment, we have to select the contractor first. The project manager, in this case, is myself. The regional construction change order, Jim Hanley. The construction area supervisor is Wayne Zambito, and the regional construction engineer is Mike Pimpinella. Now, this is all, you know, for the sake of training purposes, I've set this up with these people. It varies project to project, region to region, and you would set it up as per your regional for your job, so to speak. All right, and then we would click OK. All right, now we are in currently as the assistant PM. So, oh, there we go. Finally got notification that that was sent. So now this is ready for approval. It's currently sitting with the PM for approval, which in this case happens to be me. We would want to, whoa.
Oh, Eli, you just got called out by someone in the audience. You forgot to attach your AEW.
Oh, yes. Dang it. Dang it. All right, we can fix that. We'll do that live. My brain gets working faster than my fingers.
And while we wait for Eli to log back in, our chat feature does not have a spell check. However, Site Manager does. You should always do your spell checks on your explanations as well. It was pointed out to us by an audience member.
It's actually a good little lesson. So now that we've created it, we need to go find it again and change it back to draft status, attach our AEW. This is just like a DWR. We're going to open. We know that it's for D263073, and it was change order 210. This should also come with a warning as well. You should not switch a change order back to draft status without letting your RCO know first. But we have, and they said it was good. We're going to change it back to draft. We're going to go up here to attachments, new OLE. We're going to create from file, browse. And we have our signed AEW. Always add all and add. We're going to do a save again. Hopefully this works. All right, we're good to go. It is always good policy after you attach something to make sure it properly attached. Site Manager has a mind of its own and sometimes does not play nice, so we're just going to check. And what you know, that's what it was supposed to look like. and it did not work. But when attaching an AEW, it prefers the scanned copy. If you attach the version of this file with just the digital signature on it in the fillable, format, Site Manager really does not like this. It does not digest your signature very well. It's a good policy to print these out and then scan them again in this manner. We're not going to get hung up on the attachment not being there. This is only training. So now we can switch this back to pending. Oh, it's moving really slow currently.
So we're getting some comments in the chat that I'll present for everyone to know. As Eli said, Site Manager and attachments are very fickle. You really need to make sure that your attachments reopen at least for yourself. I've been told it's easier to double click on the attachment instead of highlighting it and clicking on the running man symbol. Also, it's very important that you not have other Adobe files already open when you attempt to open attachments in Site Manager. That will lead to opening streaming errors, and you or this person reviewing the order will think that the attachment is broken, but really it's not. So close all Adobe files before you start working in Site Manager and opening attachments. And if you can't get your attachment to reopen, it is highly likely that the next person in the approval chain also cannot. And if they can't review it, it's going to get kicked back for you to remove the attachments and reattach them anyway. So it's best practice to make sure all that's in line before you submit.
That is correct.
And your files should be as optimized as possible. If you don't need color to be represented on your attachment, save it in black and white. And again, you should never submit any live, open, signable PDF forms to anyone after they've been approved. They should be locked down at that point so that they can't be amended by anyone, not just in Site Manager, but in general.
Are we all set?
Yeah, I think so.
All right, I've changed it back to pending. Reset up the approval levels. And it's, oh, that one worked fast. Mail was sent. Now we are also the EIC for this project, and I was in and created this as the assistant. It is currently with the EIC for their approval. If we go up to services, change order tracking, and then we're going to click on the tracking list. This is where the current status of that order. It is with me as the PM for approval next, which I'm not going to dive into approving the CO at this point. And I think we're all set.
Yeah, that was good. Thanks, Eli. I really appreciate that. Hopefully everybody got a little bit of insight with that just to see what it looks like in Site Manager, just to kind of close the gap between what we're talking about in the book and how you actually put it into the Site Manager program. I guess at this point we'll just open it up to any further questions. I think we've been getting quite a few as we've been going here, but any further questions?
So I have one that came through the Q&A. I've used the FCP before, but on my last estimate, it doesn't show that the FCP has been used. Not exactly sure what you're saying there, but you won't.
So Amy, I answered that one just because I can't type in the Q&A for whatever reason. I couldn't, but I did it privately with chat, so she should be all set.
Okay, then we'll ignore that one. I don't have any others sent to me privately, Mike. I don't know about you and Eli.
Yeah, I don't see any other questions unless anybody has something else today. So when are the videos available? When can we see these later on? That's a John question. Probably in the next couple of weeks we'll get something. We'll get a few of them done and under our belt. We'll post them.
Yeah,
that sound good?
You guys hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh. Yeah, I reached out. I got to figure out, it's weird because the recordings come through as WebEx files. I actually reached out to ITS to figure out how to be able to post them. So I'm still waiting to hear back from those guys. So as soon as I hear back how to do it, we'll get those posted up and let the regions know they can get the words out to you guys.
Very good, thanks. Question about explanations. Yeah, Eli touched a little bit on it. I think we'll talk about it more with the change orders, Amy and Eric. Maybe that's something we can follow up on in the next few discussions. But the explanations should be enough to tell everybody what's going on, but sometimes they don't need to be overly specific for every little item. There are the standard ones, but you know, again, Eli kind of mentioned, depends on the magnitude, like a $1,000 overage or something might be able to use a canned stock answer, but you know, a $250,000 overrun is going to need more than just one line that the engineer's estimate was incorrect. So, and then, you know, regionally too, your change order person can give you some direction on that. There's not really set rules, but just think about if you were reviewing it. So anybody who's typing in an explanation, you understand exactly why we are having a change order here, but everyone else down the line has relatively no idea. You know, maybe your construction supervisor, your RCE might have a little bit of knowledge, but everybody past them has no idea. So you want to give them enough information to basically explain what you're doing, but you don't want to give so much that you're writing, you know, a novel every time you have, you know, some kind of change. So there's a fine line there. Your construction supervisor and your change order specialist can definitely help. Hopefully that answers your question.
All right. And just to piggyback on that, everybody kind of has their own style when writing an explanation. But as long as you answer, you know, the basic who's, the what, the why, the where, and the how, that'll work.
All right, well, I don't see any more questions from anyone. Unfortunately, Mike had to leave the meeting early. If there's no other questions that we can take care of right now, we'll end a little early. Y'all can get back to your real lives, and we'll see you again next Tuesday. Again, please try to sign in with your full name and your region number. We do have a list, but we can't tell who anybody is if we're questioned other than to give the whole list out, and it's not easy to give that whole list out. And again, those of you that are dialing in on a telephone, please email your regional contact with your telephone number and your name so that they're aware that you were in. I got one more question here. Bear with me so I can scroll down. Well, it was a thank you. You're quite welcome. Thank you. So thank you again all for attending, and we will see you next Tuesday. Thank you, Eli. Great job.
Awesome job. Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, anytime.
That was much better with the beefs turned off.